Hey there, DawgNation. Cody Chaffins and Connor Riley. Cody filling in for Kaylee Mansell this week here on DawgNation at Large. And it is absolutely killing Kaylee that she cannot be on the show today. She is on assignment down at the Senior Bowl. And how do I know it is killing Kaylee that she can't be here? We have Meme Machine coming up later. She went ahead and sent in a meme anyway. And actually, it kind of fits our topic that we're going to start the show with today. So let's just go ahead and show you the meme that Kaylee wanted to send in for today's Meme Machine. How bad she wanted to be here on the show today. It has to do with what's going around the internet this week. 5'9" and 7/8. Yes, Diego Pavia's measurements at the Senior Bowl when he was finally listed. Of course, he was 6 foot on the team's media guide. The tweet says, I know people will say he's not tall enough, but I promise if he's given a chance, he could be one of the best jockeys in the sport of horse racing. Now, the funny part is, I think Pavia is getting hate just because of his attitude throughout the Heisman process. I think normally people wouldn't pile on something like this, but I think that's why he has it coming, right?
100%. It's like it fits the meme of guys who on dating apps say they're 6 foot actually turn out to be 5'9". Like it's almost too perfect that like Pavia has fit this to a T. But, like who amongst us hasn't, fibbed a little bit with our height and weight as it fluctuates and changes over the year? I think the fact that it's going from 5'9" to 6 foot is a bit much, but it all comes out in the end.
Yeah, Connor, you and I are both guys who played high school football, and we're both offensive linemen and both not much bigger than they, not as big as they should have been as offensive linemen. But yep. I can just remember it was common practice. Coach would do your height and weight, and he said, we're going to add on 20 pounds, and we are going to add on a couple of inches before we put that out in what was our media guide at the time. So, lying about height and weight in football is absolutely nothing new. Now, 5'9" to 6 foot, a bit of a stretch.
That's a bit much. And look, in regular parts of life, for a long time on my driver's license, I had my weight listed at 195 pounds. You can go back through some pictures of me over the years of my time at DawgNation. I was pretty far off from 195 pounds. I'm now safely under that, and so it still ends up being wrong. But, as much hate as Diego Pavia is going to get, who amongst us hasn't lied on their driver's license or their official athletic website height and weight from time to time?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to not have to go through online dating, but yes, that is a common thing that people despise about online dating, is that little lying on the metrics there. Yeah, for me, I currently also lie on the driver's license, wishing I was smaller than I was, but I wish I was bigger in high school. It was one of those things that I didn't start gaining weight until I got out of high school and onto the Bolton Dining Hall or onto Clayton Street. And that's when I attended. Where was all that weight when I needed it in high school?
Yeah, I would have loved to have been 250 pounds in high school. It would have helped me out on the football field a lot more. As an adult, there's probably a few times I was wishing I was closer to my high school weight.
All right, it's one of those things. Kaylee's not here today. We'll try and do our best to fill in right here on DawgNation at Large.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
All right, got a lot to get to on today's show. We're going to hit a lot of different topics, and one of those things, it's going to be an interesting argument that Connor wants to make here in a minute about how Georgia is a winner inside the transfer portal. We'll get to that. We'll also talk about some of the Dogs who are already getting some preseason recognition way too early. We'll talk about that a little bit, talk about the Super Dogs, talk about some of the NFL stuff happening, including some former Georgia Bulldogs there. Plus, Kaylee, we will check in with some of the stuff she's been able to gather down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, some fun stuff, and some pretty funny stuff from some former Georgia players down there. But we're going to get started with the transfer portal. As the lists start to come out as the transfer portal closed, who were the winners this year? And I was looking through 24/7, had LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, Miami, Ohio State. They're winners of the transfer portal this year. On 3, LSU, Indiana, Texas Tech, Miami, Texas. So a lot of those same teams going through there. But Connor, nowhere listed are the University of Georgia Bulldogs, and you think that's a mistake?
I think in the national sense, I think Georgia did very, very well when it comes to the transfer portal. And look, I know that there are some people out there that would like to see Georgia be more aggressive in terms of the players that they go and add out of the transfer portal. They make 8 additions, the 2 big ones being wide receiver Isaiah Canyon out of Georgia Tech and Auburn defensive end Amarius Williams. But Georgia's not playing the same game that I think an LSU, that I think a Texas is when it comes to the transfer portal, that an Ole Miss certainly is. The name of their game is retention, and they want to keep their players in this program for a longer period of time. And I think that moving forward probably needs to be taken into greater account when it comes to the transfer portal. Are you hanging on to your top end talent, especially in a place like Georgia? And I would probably include a Texas and LSU, even a Texas Tech moving forward in this, because these programs are all recruiting at a high level from the high school ranks as well. But if you're just sort of churning through your roster every year and not bringing in and not retaining those talents on a year in, year out basis, I do think that doesn't tell the full story when it comes to your roster. And today, CBS Sports, they put out their top 100 list of transfers of guys who have gone on to new schools. Canyon and Amarius Williams both end up on the list. But I think the most important thing for Georgia, of those top 100 impact players, there were no players from Georgia that moved on to a new school. Of the losses of the guys that you've seen move on to the next level or move on, to a new school, the biggest loss was Dominic Kelly, a guy that, let's be honest, Cody, who we all like as a player, but he was not going to be a big factor for this 2026 Georgia team. In total, they really lose only 12 players to the transfer portal. That's the fewest in the SEC. And so when you factor in that they were able to supplement what they wanted out of the transfer portal, getting a big-time wide receiver, getting more help on the defensive line, adding a lot of help in the secondary there, I do think that for Georgia, with what they wanted to do, the transfer portal period was a success for them. And I do think that's going to make them a winner on the field, even if it obviously looks very different from the big game hunting that LSU did, that even a Texas did amongst SEC teams.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting point to make. You talked about the portal additions, Amarius Williams out of Auburn, Isaiah Canyon, Georgia Tech. Bryson Beaver technically comes in as a transfer guy. He is a 2026 guy, but had been at Oregon when Dylan Raiola made him move to Georgia. Khalil Barnes out of Clemson, Gentry Williams, Oklahoma, Dante Dowdell, just some of the other guys that Georgia had. And then when you look at the losses, like you said, Dominic Kelly was the one that kind of, we were like, maybe we would have liked to have him. Nowhere near the level of Damon Wilson from last year that you lost. It just doesn't equal. Janelle Aguero goes, and that's a name a lot of people know because he played a lot at the University of Georgia. But if you were paying attention at the end of last year, he was kind of getting passed by. And I think he sensed that, but he ends up at a big-time school going over to Ole Miss, Kelly to Ohio State as well. So those, you can kind of tell by where guys go how big of a loss. Chris Jones goes to Boston College, and you're like, okay, well then nobody else really saw him as a frontline starter. Elo Mendoza goes to Purdue. Okay, that, it's in the Big Ten, but it's at the very bottom. I think the other one that maybe stung a little bit was Beau Hughley, just considering the Monroe Freeling moving on and just the depth piece. But here's the thing about Beau Hughley is if he was good enough to start at Georgia, he would have started last year at Georgia because they could have used him. And he did start a game or two, but he did not continue to start as the year came on. So I think that's an interesting point to make. And you talk about some of the big names out there, the guys that are going to get you on a list like this. Well, LSU, Jordan Seaton, top offensive tackle out there for this year. That's going to get you. Prince Will Umalamalian, four-star edge who goes from Ole Miss to LSU. Sam Levitt goes to LSU. Those are kind of big names that, they got 3 of the top 5 and on these rankings. So those are going to get you on a list like this. But for Georgia, I think it was important what you talked about, the re-signees. We heard from Kirby Smart this off-season when folks were asking him about the transfer portal and all these announcements that I have re-signed with my school. Kirby ain't about that life. He didn't want to hear. He kind of actually got on his soapbox a little bit and said, I don't want to hear about you re-signing. I want to hear about you getting better. So you weren't going to hear about Georgia re-signing some of their big-time players. It's not going to make news like it is when you bring in Sam Levitt or you bring in Darian Mensah or do some of these other things in the transfer portal. But if you go through and look, it is interesting. So we talked about Prince Will, and we'll just call him Prince Will from this point on. He's a 5-star. So if you look at some of the other 4-stars, Damon Wilson was a 4-star edge, Jordan Ross, a 4-star edge. But when you look at who Georgia, I was sitting in New Orleans wondering, is Georgia going to lose a 5-star edge? Boy, they could have. Isaiah Gibson could have easily said, I didn't play as a freshman. I'm going somewhere else where I can make money. Gabe Harris could have said, like Damon Wilson did last year, I want to go cash in somewhere else. But both of those guys come back, but that doesn't make front page news.
No, it doesn't. And certainly from a national perspective, you look at, retaining Nate Frazier. That was bigger than anyone. That was actually one of the ones that got out. But like a guy like a KJ Bolden, a Chris Cole, who I think could have commanded top dollar and would have been one of the best players in the transfer portal. The fact that you're able to retain all of those guys, I think, is so important. And one thing you touched on, Cody, you look at the guys Georgia did lose, Janelle Aguero, Beau Hewley. Those guys had been in the program for 3 years. I think Georgia knew what they were, and I think they understood that, hey, we're comfortable letting those guys go because while, yes, they'd love to have Janelle Aguero, I don't want that to get misconstrued. Like, this team would have been better this upcoming season had Janelle Aguero been on it. But he's going to get a lot more playing time at a place like Ole Miss, whereas at Georgia, they're going to lean on developing a young player like a Rayshawn Dinkins. You look on the offensive line. It's not necessarily a zero-sum game, but would you have rather had Juan Gaston or Beau Hewley? I think just about everyone is taking Juan Gaston in that instance there. And I think for me, the most important sort of metric and the way to look at this in terms of how Georgia is doing and how they're doing better in the transfer portal than they have in recent years. Going into last year, that junior class, those guys that you think make up, the backbone of your team, half of that junior class was already gone, either being medically retired or having transferred out of the program. 13 of the 26 2023 signees were not on the Georgia roster to start the 2025 season. Going into next year, 23 of the 28 signees from that 2024 class are still at Georgia. And so the fact that they've been able, I think, to age up their team a little bit to where they're not as young by doing a better job of retaining their team, I think gives you a lot more hope and gives you a lot more encouragement going into next season with what they'll have. And I think that's Kirby Smart showing, hey, I'm making an adjustment to how I use the transfer portal and how we go about retaining guys. I think that starts in recruiting with going after guys who are more likely to stick around long term rather than having, like they unfortunately did in the 2023 class, so many guys who are maybe more willing to bounce right away if they don't necessarily get or their careers don't play out the way they want. So the fact that they've made those adjustments, I think, is a positive step in the right direction. But having said all that, if this season ends the exact same way this past one did, with a first-round playoff exit or a one-and-done playoff exit, once again, like it did in 2024, I do think at that point, maybe that's when you start to see Kirby Smart and Georgia take a different look at how the transfer portal is used going forward. And maybe they do start to lean on that a little bit more and be more transactional every year, even though, as we heard at SEC Media Days, we hear throughout the season, they so clearly want to form long-term relationships with guys who consistently want to get better.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things. It's kind of a make or break time for it because we can make this argument this year, but like you said, if it doesn't work out, then you're going to have to make a completely different argument moving forward. And, when you go to look at who it has worked out for and who it hasn't over the years, it's been really interesting to watch some of the teams who were listed as transfer portal winners in years past and what they actually ended up doing. LSU has been a transfer portal winner for about 3 or 4 years in a row now, and all that did was put so much pressure on Brian Kelly that they had to fire him last year. I remember Florida State, the one year they were a transfer portal winner and then had a great year with it, and then they were a transfer portal winner and then went 2-10. So it can shake out a lot of different ways. One of the other parts of this story that I think is interesting, and I mentioned Isaiah Gibson, but some of the guys that you kept in, how you're going to get old and stay old is by having those guys who were freshmen and didn't play, or redshirt freshmen or sophomores and didn't play a lot and didn't transfer out. By keeping those guys, you're getting a little older. So guys like Justin Williams, Sokovie White-Helton, Isaiah Gibbs, some of these guys who didn't play very much this year, but are definitely expected to step into bigger roles next season. I think those guys are going to be very important to have in your program. Keeping those guys, those were really, to me, the guys you were really at risk of losing. Sokovie White-Helton would have had, nobody would have blamed him if he's gone. But now we're hearing from all these guys at the All-Star games that, boy, y'all watch out for Sokovie White. If you saw what we saw in practice, he could be one of those guys. So that's good news to hear. And the fact that you're keeping and Justin Williams, a 5-star out of high school, boy, he hadn't played enough, for a 5-star out of high school yet. He could have been easily discontent with what's going on at Georgia and looked for greener pastures. But Georgia was able to keep him in. I think some of those guys who were able to get old, get those reps in practice, and now step into that role, that seems like one of those things that doesn't happen a lot with a transfer portal anymore.
Yeah, I think this 2026 Georgia team is going to be a bit closer to what we saw in like 2020, 2021, where yes, the transfer portal was around. There were a few players that were cycling into the program. Georgia was making supplemental adds. 2021, they brought in Clemson defensive back Darian Kendrick. I thought he was huge for that team to win a national title, and I don't know if they win a national title without him. But at that same point in time, it's a lot of guys sticking around. It's a team that is aging together. And the fact that they're continuing to do that, I think, is where Kirby is trying to get this team every year. Where, as you point out, Cody, like LSU and Florida State, we have no idea what to really expect from them on a year in, year out basis. 2 years ago, Ole Miss was a winner in the transfer portal, and they end up missing the playoff. This year, not nearly as much pub, but they hit on a lot of guys, namely lucking into Trinidad Chambliss, and they go on and make a run to the college football playoff semifinal. I think as Georgia gets deeper into the transfer portal and they get a better understanding of how to navigate this space, I think this is the most clear team that Kirby Smart has had in terms of what he wants to be and how he wants to use the transfer portal. The problem is that because of the way recent seasons have ended for Georgia, I do think there's an added pressure on this year of this model really needs to work for Georgia this year. Otherwise, things are going to have to change moving forward, because you already saw in this 2026 recruiting class, Georgia didn't quite get as many top end, 5-star, top 50 overall talents as you and Jeff sort of outlined on Before the Hedges this week. And if that's not going to be the case moving forward, you do sort of start to wonder, where does that high-end talent start to come from? Because as you point out, Cody, Justin Williams, 5-star, Talon Taylor, 5-star, Nate Frazier, high-end 4-star. A lot of your top players who are stepping into big roles, these are guys that traditionally, they're following what we used to know as the college football path. If Georgia doesn't do what they do this year and they don't take steps forward, they don't get to at least a college football playoff semifinal, I do think maybe then that's when you have to start to have those hard conversations from Kirby's perspective about, okay, do we start to do things differently when it comes to the transfer portal? Do we have to start playing the game that LSU is playing, that a Miami is playing, that a Texas is playing, and getting sort of on those national transfer portal winner lists, knowing that that's where another avenue where you can get high-end talent if it's not necessarily coming to you from the recruiting ranks.
All that said, is there a guy or two you would have liked to see, or a position group that you would have liked to see in Georgia get, maybe add one more big-time piece at?
I think offensive tackle, to me, you touched on it earlier, maybe why the Beau Hewley loss was felt a little bit more, because you do lose Monroe Freeling there. Jordan Seaton was just not a realistic option for Georgia. He was so clearly going to be well above beyond what Georgia would feel comfortable spending there. And the reality is there just aren't a lot of quality offensive tackles out there, period, much less those that have what Georgia is looking for to come in via the transfer portal. They don't often take a lot of players on the offensive line from the transfer portal, and so I think that's a big reason why. You can maybe make a case for another wide receiver depending on what they lost, but at the same point in time, I think you have to trust your evaluations from the high school standpoint and get real playing time for guys like a Sokovia White-Helton, like a Talon Taylor, a Landon Rolden, a CJ Wiley, even a freshman like Craig Dandridge, I think can come in and play right away. So really, to me, offensive tackle was maybe the one that you would have liked to see Georgia make an ad at, but there were maybe 2 or 3 guys in this entire portal cycle that maybe fit what Georgia was looking for. And I understand, because of the timing and the way Freeling went about his decision, Georgia may not have been in position to act quick enough in those instances.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I think a lot of folks wanted to say, they said Zachariah Branch is gone. We didn't get Zachariah Branch out of the portal. We should remind everybody that nobody knew Zachariah Branch was Zachariah Branch coming out of the portal last year. That everybody, some people on our staff, said Noah Thomas was going to be the better option than Zachariah Branch. So, we don't know what Canyon's going to be. We don't know what Khalil Barnes is going to be next year. Yep. It'll be interesting to watch. So we're going to talk about some of those other young guys coming up in just a minute. Before we do that, I want to thank Zagoria Law. They are a sponsor each and every week here on DawgNation at Large. What we love about having Zagoria Law as a partner with DawgNation is because they represent folks who are bitten by dogs or knocked over by dogs. Any dog-related injuries, they specialize in it. They actually have written a book on these types of cases. They know how to win these types of cases. When you get somebody to work on anything for you, you want a specialist. Well, they are the dog bite specialist, and they are the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. They wrote the book on these cases. So if your loved one's been hurt by someone else's dog, give them a call at 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DAWG, DOGBITE. Or you can check out their website, ZagoriaLaw.com. Let's do some dog bites. All right, Connor, for dog bites, KJ Bolden getting some way too early love. I think it's very overdue. He's one of those guys who kind of does everything silently, but you look at the end of last year, highest graded guy on PFF for Georgia on the defense, second on the team in tackles from that safety position, couple interceptions, could have had maybe a couple more, but he's getting some love early on.
Absolutely. Named an on-3 early All-American, and I think he's in position entering next year to be the best safety in college football. Learn from a guy like Malachi Starks, who went on to be a first-round pick. You bring back Caleb Downs from Ohio State. He's now moving on. I think that KJ, and I encourage people to go back and watch the interview we did with KJ after the Ole Miss loss. He's saying the right things that you want to say in that situation, where he's not doing the sore loser, the better team didn't win today. He gave Ole Miss all the credit in the world. But at the same point in time, he knows that there are things that he can do better to improve on. He knows he's got to uplift his teammates. He knows that there are things that he can do better next season. And that's a real terrifying thought for opposing offenses, because we already saw KJ make big plays, as you see the video that Cody shot, the interceptions in the Texas and the Tennessee game, the tip that he had that led to Dalon Everett's interception in the SEC championship game. I know that Georgia secondary didn't play their best in that loss to Ole Miss, but I think KJ Bolden was no fault in that game. I think they had a lot of moving pieces at the other parts in the secondary, and with him coming back for another year, and with what they have in that secondary, I'm going to be real interested in seeing what steps forward does KJ make, because if he continues to be more of a playmaker, he's going to have a monster season for Georgia, in addition to being, I think, one of, if not their most vocal leaders in 2026.
Yeah, he's been one of those guys. It's like, man, he's going to be one of those guys at the end of the day. Like, how long has he been around Georgia? Because he's felt like an old guy since like game 2 of last year, because he's always conducted himself that way. He's always looked, and acted much older than he has been. So the fact that he is now in his 3rd year, it's going to feel much older, and he's going to be one of those guys. I'm like, man, he's going to be heady out there. I love that. All right, so KJ Bolden was on that PFF's top 100, way too early top 100 list, and you had 5 Georgia Bulldogs on that list. Drew Bobo was on there. You had Ernest Green, Gunnar Stockton, KJ Bolden, who we talked about, and also Raylan Wilson. So that prompted Mike Griffith and I to do our top 5 Georgia players the other day for 2026. And I'll tell you, my 5 were Chris Cole, KJ Bolden, Drew Bobo, Gunnar Stockton, Nate Frazier. And Connor, I think you feel like I left somebody off that list?
I don't want to say I left somebody out. Look, there are a lot of really good players at Georgia, but I think one player who's maybe slipping through the cracks a little bit in the way that we talk about him is Elijah Griffin. This is a guy who is an absolute stud. I don't think people realized how difficult what he was asked to do during his freshman season was, where essentially, hey, we're going to ask you to play a ton of snaps right away. 320 on his freshman season. That's more than Jalen Carter played in his freshman season back in 2020. I know those are different types of seasons, but the way things went, the fact that Georgia so comfortably put Elijah Griffin out there, the fact that he played through injury early in the season, he told us at Sugar Bowl Media Day he was dealing with an ankle injury in the early part of the season, and at the end of the year, you saw him make big steps forward. He was all over the field against Texas in that game late November. Had a hand in the forced fumble that led to a touchdown in that game against Ole Miss. The run defense and the improvements that they made, I think it was because Elijah Griffin took a step forward. I think if we're sitting here, early next January, and we're talking about Georgia once again as a team that can win the national title, I think Elijah Griffin is going to be a bigger reason than a lot of the players that are right now getting that top 5 love, that top 5 pub. And I think Elijah Griffin is a guy who, it would not surprise me in the slightest if we were talking about him as the most dominant player on Georgia's defense next season, even with guys like a Chris Cole, a KJ Bolden, an Ellis Robinson on the outside. I think Elijah Griffin is that special, and I think he can have a very, very big 2026 season. And if he does, watch out, because Georgia is going to be as loaded as anybody.
Yeah, I think a lot's going to be put on his plate this year. He's going to be that guy that starts getting more double teams than ever, as he is the name everybody has circled on this Georgia defensive line for this year. So it'll be interesting. Can he still be a game wrecker in there and kind of fill in some some shoes of some older guys who have been there, done that for Georgia on the defensive line. All right, for the 25th straight year, the Georgia Bulldogs have a representative playing in the Super Bowl. This one comes from the Patriots. It's Jared Wilson, who's a starting guard for this Patriots team. We'll also mention the head coach of the Seahawks is a former UGA analyst, grad assistant, and Mike McDonald. But Jared Wilson, I want to ask you, Connor, because you're more of a Patriots guy. Well, he only played 1 year at Georgia. The knock on him coming out was he hadn't played a whole lot of football, at least in games. Did we expect him to go into the NFL and become a starter as a rookie?
When they drafted him in the 3rd round, I thought that we could see him as a starter. I never really considered it at the guard position. And the fact that he's gone in there and done that, I think he missed 2 games with injury, but to start 15 games, to start next to another rookie in Will Campbell, and for them to get to the Super Bowl in year 1, I think is a huge credit, not just to Mike Vrabel in New England, but the way that Jared has had to come in and step up and play right away at that next level. And it's so interesting where you see him play so well as a guard, whereas at Georgia for so long we heard, hey, this is the guy we want to groom at center, this is the steps that we want to take. And then, one of the talking points that we had last offseason, and it proved to be true this year, was that we thought Georgia would get an upgrade when they went from Jared Wilson, to Drew Bobo, and I think you saw that play out. But it speaks to the athleticism. I think it speaks to Jared Wilson's ability as a football player, that he's able to make that change from center to guard and go on and be a regular starter in his first year in the NFL. Mind you as well, he's now going into the Super Bowl, and I know there's been a lot of talk about the Patriots offense of late. I know I've certainly heard a lot about it. They placed already 3 top 5 defenses, and they're getting ready to face another one in Seattle. So I think if New England's going to win the Super Bowl in the coming Sunday, I think Jared Wilson is going to play a big reason why that is the case.
Is this going to be a knock for Georgia? I think back to some of the Jim Donnan teams who put out such incredible NFL talent. You're like, that guy was on Georgia, and they only went, with this record. Is this going to be one of those guys we look back and say, why did Georgia only start him 1 year? I know you got to protect the backup center at some point, but is this a miss by not having him play earlier on in his career? Because there were injuries ahead of him in his junior year or his sophomore year.
I would say no, if only because of the fact that Georgia had 2 other guys start 15-plus games at the guard position, Dylan Fairchild and Tate Ratledge. That team last year just had so much interior talent, and I think they saw center as an avenue for them to get Jared Wilson onto the field, and he's clearly an NFL-level talent. So I don't put that knock on really anyone. I just think it speaks to, and it's an era that's going to be harder to see. They had so much talent, and they were just trying to get as much of it on the field as they could. For Jared Wilson, that meant squeezing him in at center because, I don't think Dylan Fairchild and Tate Ratledge are guys that necessarily Jared would have played over at the University of Georgia.
All right, let's not knock your guy, Mike McDonald, Centennial High School grad. Just like you guys both played football for Centennial, both Knights there. I know there's a lot of pride there. And for Georgia people, if you blinked, you missed him. He didn't play college football. He was helping out as a college student. And there you can see, I found some of my old video from the 2010 spring practice, and they used to let us shoot video at practice, which is another crazy thing, but there was Mike McDonald right in the middle of it. So he's not a huge part of Georgia's history, but he is a part of Georgia history.
Yeah, no, I think for me this is just an awesome local story. We went to the same high school together. We both go on to Georgia. He graduates from the university, gets involved in coaching, and since then has just been great at every stop he was at. Was such an important part of those Ravens teams, was the 1-year defensive coordinator at Michigan when they sort of first broke through. Georgia got the better of Mike McDonald that day when they beat the brains out of them in the Orange Bowl, scoring, I think the final score was 34-11. And then you see him go on, be a very successful defensive coordinator for the Ravens. I think the reason the Ravens took a step back is because they missed McDonald. He wins 10 games in his first year in Seattle, and this year breaks through, gets to the Super Bowl, beats Sean McVay, another Georgia sort of local kid here who played at Marist. I know there are a lot of people in my circle who were thrilled to see a Centennial alum beat a Marist alum in the NFC Championship game. But this is still something to be proud of, and I think it speaks to the legacy that the University of Georgia has. It is able to give Mike McDonald his start in coaching and ultimately help him progress to where he has gotten to this point in what will be a very successful coaching career.
McDonald, I believe, Kenny McIntosh threw a touchdown against McDonald's defense there at Michigan?
That is correct, yes. And Kenny McIntosh now, he is a member of the Seahawks, will not play in this game as he recovers from a knee injury. But nice little bit of history there.
Yeah, a little connection there for Seattle side. All right, sticking with the NFL, there's now 2 former Georgia offensive coordinators who are head coaches in the NFL. Todd Monken gets the Browns job, and the other one, everybody's racking their brain. Who's the other one? Brian Schottenheimer, who's the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys as well. Your thoughts on Monken teaming up with Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland?
Yeah, I know there are a lot of Georgia fans out there wondering, hey, could Todd Monken, hire Glenn Schumann to be his defensive coordinator at the next level? Does Kirby Smart maybe want to go be a defensive coordinator at the NFL level? Don't worry, Georgia fans. That is not happening. I'm glad that Todd Monken got this chance, if only because this means I think we get people to stop asking, well, can Georgia bring back Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator? I think Todd is so much more comfortable at the NFL level. And look, the Browns, I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. It's not a great situation right now, but there are only 32 of these jobs. And I think Todd Monken so clearly put an imprint on the University of Georgia in his time here, and now he's going to get a chance to go do that with the Cleveland Browns at the next level. We'll see what sort of career he ends up having here, but a well-deserved recognition for a guy who has long been one of the greater offensive minds in the game of football.
It's so interesting to me. That video that we show is from the Texas SEC Championship a year ago. He came back wearing his Georgia stuff. He was doing interviews this year wearing Georgia shirts. He still has a huge love for the university. It almost seems reciprocal because Dog fans love him just as much, but he still loves Georgia, even though he wasn't here a ton of time either.
Right, because remember, when he came to Georgia prior to the 2020 season, he had just gotten fired in Cleveland, of all places. And his stock, this was a guy who was a hotshot coordinator in the early 2010s, hired as the head coach at Southern Miss, was a play caller for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Georgia, in some ways, took a chance on him as much as Todd Monken took a chance on Georgia. And that partnership worked perfectly. They won back-to-back national championships, and now Todd Monken is going to be a head coach of the Cleveland Browns moving forward, in no small part because of what he did at the University of Georgia.
All right, we also have the college football all-star games going on as guys get ready for the combine and for the NFL draft. And you had the East-West Shrine game. You had 3 wide receivers out there, which was interesting. Dylan Bell out there, Colby Young out there, Noah Thomas out there. I watched some interviews with them. We played some clips earlier this week on DawgNation Daily from those guys talking about they were very excited to see Sokovie White-Helton moving forward. But you had those guys there, and then at the Senior Bowl, you got Beau Gardner, you got Brett Thorson, you got Daylen Everett. So some Dogs trying to improve their draft stock here.
Yeah, and it sounds like those at the East-West Shrine game, I know there was a lot of chatter about Colby Young and what he was able to do to show off. Again, I think as teams get to look at Colby Young and what he can do, they're going to be really impressed, especially considering this guy who fractured his leg in the middle of October and still came back to play for Georgia in the college football playoff. I think when teams get a look at Dylan Bell, they're going to like his versatility and what he can do. Again, he for so long likened to Deebo Samuel. Again, I don't think he's the same level of athlete, but I think a smart offensive team can make Dylan Bell into a very useful player, as we saw him do at Georgia this past year. Michael Morris, it seems like, had a very good Shrine Bowl performance. I know there were a couple clips of him out there going well in the game. And I'm going to be interested in sort of seeing what we see from Dalon Everett in the Combine in coming weeks, along with wrapping up the Senior Bowl down there in Mobile, because I do think he has some versatility. And as Georgia fans know, this is a guy who made big play after big play in big games. Was the SEC Championship game MVP, a Texas killer in his time in college, making multiple big plays. So I think when teams get a look at Dalon Everett, I don't necessarily know if he's going to be an outside corner, as you see him playing a little bit in the slot there, but I'm very interested in seeing what Dalon Everett ultimately develops into, and I think NFL teams are as well.
Yeah, he's another guy who's played a lot of football under a head coach who loves defensive backs and Kirby Smart. We're going to hear from Dalon Everett coming up in just a little bit, but before we do that, I want to thank another sponsor on the show today. That is Retro Roofers. They've got more winter weather moving in, it looks like, coming up this weekend, and so it's always important to have that roof over your head taken care of. And if it is time to get your roof replaced, we want to urge you to look to the guys who have been on HGTV and do it right. That's Retro Roofers. They install GAF shingles, shingle maker, and they do it so well that GAF has named them to their President's Club, which only 19 out of 3,000 folks who install those GAF shingles are in the President's Club. Well, Retro Roofers, they are members of the President's Club. They also get that GAF Golden Pledge warranty on every project, and they'll have the 5-year warranty on their workmanship as well. The Retro goes back to the service they want to give. They want to do it like the good old days where they're giving you great service, but that doesn't mean the stuff they're doing is not innovative. For example, they have the Equipter mobile dumpster that rolls right up to your house. You're getting fewer of those nails that always happen. If you've ever had your roof replaced, you know what I'm talking about. Stuff ends up everywhere if you don't have the right company. Well, Retro Roofers is cutting down on that by using the latest technology there. So they are folks that want to give you the old-time service with a new kind, the new technology, whether it is with the shingles or with the stuff they're using. They are partners with over 25 insurance companies, so you probably can find somebody that can work with them. If you want to check out their video page at retroroofers.com, we urge you to do that. You can see they'll tell you where other folks are cutting corners and they're not, something to look out for if you're having roofing contractors come to your house, but you probably just want Retro Roofers to do it. So visit retroroofers.com today, get you an estimate, and get those folks replacing your roof. All right, it's time for Meme Machine.
Who's that going down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a meme machine and running block. It's a meme machine and running block. No,
All right, so Kate, we showed you Kaylee's off the top. She's taking digs at Diego Pavia. I have a feeling that's going to happen for the next month or two. There will be all kinds of new stuff coming out there. Connor, what is your meme for this week?
Yeah, so there was a lot of weather out there impacting things throughout the United States this past weekend. This comes from Sopranos World Breaking. 2 New Jersey residents are currently trapped inside a van amid the massive storm. This is obviously a callback to the infamous Pine Barrens episode from Sopranos, one of the great all-time hours of television. And if you were unfortunate this weekend, and there are a lot of people in Mississippi, Nashville, I know for a long time they didn't have power, and in some cases still don't have power. A tough weather weekend for a lot of people out there, and so quickly turned, nice to bring a little bit of levity, a little bit of humor to the situation, but it was not a pleasant weekend for many on the weather front this past weekend.
Yeah, I think we got a little luckier. I'm closer to Atlanta. I think the folks closer to Athens definitely had to deal with some stuff over the weekend. I just had to deal with the 2 kids in my house that were going stir crazy, and you couldn't convince them to go outside because it wasn't snow. It was ice, and nobody wanted to be out in that. All right, my meme today it has to do with college football playoff making their changes. So this is going to be next year. College football committee the week before the final rankings. Well, maybe we'll have Notre Dame at 12. No, let's move them to 13 because, of course, now Notre Dame has a clause in the new college football playoff, which is still 12 teams, that if they're ranked inside the top 12, they're automatically in. I think it's something that's definitely going to come into consideration for the voters. They're going to know that they're automatically in over maybe a team who's at 11 who probably is ranked ahead of Notre Dame, but because of the clause, they may have to drop Notre Dame to 13 just to keep them out.
Right. This year, for example, if that final ranking had held, Notre Dame would have been in the college football playoff and Miami would have been out. So does that mean you drop Notre Dame further? Probably that's the easiest way to go about it there. But, maybe you drop an Alabama instead of a Miami. That way you don't have the Notre Dame, Alabama, cluster there. This is such Notre Dame getting preferential treatment, and I get they're different. And I've long been a proponent of Notre Dame being an independent. I like that aspect. But at a certain point in time, especially as we move into this new era of college football, and you look at the schedule that Notre Dame played, Notre Dame lost to the 2 playoff-worthy opponents that they played last season. And that's enough, in my opinion, to have been kept out, especially when you look at some of the other teams that were in the field. And again, I think this just goes back to Notre Dame, a team that has been, in my opinion, worthy of making the college football playoff more than not. I think if they had made the playoff this year, could they have gone on the run Miami did? Absolutely. But at the same point in time, I think they deserve to be out of the playoff this year based on what we saw and based on the criteria around them. And so this just sort of reeks to your point, Cody, is just more preferential treatment for the Fighting Irish.
I was kind of bummed that we didn't go to 16 this year, and maybe just for the reason that I just want to shake things up for UGA. It needs to be different somehow, some way. Make it 16. What were your feelings on things not really, other than the Notre Dame thing, not really changing?
You're 100% right, Cody. The fix for this is so easy where we start the college football season a week earlier. We play games every single week. We get rid of conference championship games. So that first week in December, instead of conference championships, it's going straight into a 116, 215, etc. And you're doing that and you're finishing the sport on January 1st. Transfer portal opens January 2nd. It's such an easy fix. It makes so much sense. I don't think there's a big difference between 12 and 16. I think we've seen enough data that maybe the bye does at least have some impact on teams in the way that they play. But of course, it being college football, it being that the Big Ten farcically wants 24 teams in this playoff, that naturally we're just sticking with the situation that I don't think a lot of people are happy with at this point in time.
Yeah, 16 teams seems right. If Georgia has to play a 9-game SEC schedule, they would much rather not play Alabama or Texas in the SEC championship when you could get a Tulane or one of these other small conference teams that you would have to play as a number, 15 or 14 or 16 seed late in there. So really interesting stuff there. We got a little substance to our meme machine this week. A little fun conversation. All right, we got a little more substance too. Kaylee Mansell now on her way back from Mobile. She's been down there covering the Senior Bowl all week, getting the latest from some of our dogs. And it's one of those fun times a year, especially now and through the combine, where these Georgia players who are so buttoned up when they're under Kirby Smart's thumb at UGA get to let loose a little bit and open up and share some things that we don't get to hear when they are Georgia Bulldogs currently. One of those guys, though, who is always pretty open, who's always pretty fun with us, is Brett Thorson. The punter is down there at the Senior Bowl, and Kaylee caught up with the Aussie about all things Georgia and maybe away from the game, too.
What was your first impression of Kirby Smart?
It come from a FaceTime in Australia. It was funny. Inside stories. He was trying to pitch UGA to us, and I don't think he comprehended the pro kick theory that if he offers us, we say yes. So he was trying to pitch Georgia and tell us all the positives of coming to Georgia. And I was like, Coach, I don't think you understand. Like, it's up to you. Like you green light this scholarship, and I'm coming. So it's that was my first impression with him. He was had his Georgia recruiting hat on.
All right, now we're going to have some fun. I don't want to call you old, but we're the same age. You're one of the older guys on the team. Let's go that route. Was there ever any slang that the young guys had to teach you because of that generational gap?
I think there was American and young terms.
Yeah.
So I definitely had to be educated on the American terms. I think, like, when people ask how you are, they're like, you straight? And that was one of the things I had to learn. So that was a weird one. And then just even terms, if I said, oh, are we going out? And they'll be like, out where? I'm like out. As for they might be like, you're going downtown or this, like, so yeah. It was, I definitely had some learning to do.
Well, they taught you a lot about American culture. Did you teach them anything about Australian culture?
I did. A lot of them had some good questions, some good, some bad. So it was an experience trying to teach them about Australia. I think Arian Smith once asked what movies we watch in Australia, and I said just American movies, like we don't really have Australian, and he said, that's right, I forgot you can change the language on Netflix. So I got to educate him on that Australian culture is also American movies.
Give me a conspiracy theory you believe in.
Ooh.
You can say whatever. If we have to cut it out, we can.
I don't even really know. I don't try to stay away from those things. I've heard some crazy things. What's conspiracy? I don't even know. I don't look for those things.
You can double it and pass it to the next person if you need to.
I'll double it and I'll say Cass Jones thinks the Earth is flat.
Okay.
Well,
that's good to know.
So that's like, I'll throw him under the bus. That's not on me. But Cass Jones is a flat earther.
Okay, we'll have to ask him about that. It's now the Panini Bowl. What's the best kind of sandwich?
In America, turkey and cheese, like provolone.
Yeah, provolone. Yep. Arguably the GOAT. What was your first big NIL purchase?
Geez, I was in Australia. I'm trying to think. That's a tough question. Specialists don't get that much, so it wasn't like I really splashed. Like, I still drive the same old car that I got when I first got here. So maybe You've stumped me there. I got a little home theater set up. We'll say that.
Oh,
I got a projector.
that's a good
and,
one.
A good thing. So,
All right.
a little home theater.
Last one, breakout star for this upcoming season. Somebody to watch.
Chase Linton.
Chase Linton, I like that.
Yep, had a little bit of injury affected this year, but he impressed when he was in practice a lot, and excited to see him light it up.
I love hearing that name, Chase Linton, because that's not a name I've heard a ton. And he did look, I liked him on G-Day. I was excited about him. He is a big dude. Also, Cash Jones comes out as put out there as a flat earther. That is interesting. And then Arian Smith, the story about, yeah, you can just change the language on Netflix like it's Japanese.
We're really going to miss Brett Thorson. Just a one-of-a-kind, just, obviously a great punter, a great addition, a national champion in his time at the University of Georgia. But his sense of humor is just one of a kind. Drew Miller has big shoes to fill for Georgia moving forward. Like you said, I love the Chase Linton suggestion there. That's one where it's like, okay, real Georgia football fans, like, ooh, that really sends their antenna up. Whereas, maybe some more casual fans like, who is Chase Linton? Guy found himself on the field a little bit in that Sugar Bowl and in a pass rushing role. It's very important for Georgia. So good on Kaylee for asking the hard-hitting questions, really stumping Brett Thorson when it comes to his first big NIL
right,
purchase.
It felt like the easy one.
But Kaylee out there doing real journalism for our show. Love to see it.
Yeah, North Atlanta and Chase Linton. He probably had to grow up a little bit, right? He was not playing the same kind of competition, SEC competition in high school. So I do love him in year 2. All right, so there's Brett Thorson. We'll see what Dalon Everett's got for us. What'd Kaylee get with Dalon Everett?
All right, last thing. What was your first impression of Kirby Smart? The eye roll is telling.
I didn't think he played DB. When he told me that, I was like, for real? Looking at him now, I was like, I don't know if you might be lying. But when he told me, I was like, ain't no way. But I'll probably say that.
All right, I could believe that, but then you turn on the tape and you're like, oh, he had so many, he led Georgia in interceptions.
That's an incredible, honest answer from Daylen Everett. You played DB here at the University of Georgia? I don't see it, and Daylen went on to have a great career, and it's important. Daylen was going to Clemson, and then Brent Venables gets hired to be the head coach at Oklahoma. Georgia swoops in, lands him a 3-year starter here at the University of Georgia. A great answer there from Daylen, and I'm excited to see him as he continues to progress and ultimately becomes an NFL draft pick.
Yeah, he's ragging on Kirby. Kirby was hard on him those first couple of years, and that made him a much better player. All right, let's go with Beau Gardner, the long snapper. What's he got?
I would say the SEC championship this year. We had a sour taste in our mouths from when Alabama beat us in Sanford, which isn't supposed to happen. So yeah, getting back at them and finishing the year with a ring was awesome, and I'm grateful for it.
There you go. His best memory at the University of Georgia, knocking off Alabama with the confetti falling. I think a lot of dogs would say that.
Yeah, that's just a special moment, and I'm excited, because they play Alabama again next year in October. Georgia wins that. I think that SEC championship win, as we get further from it, is going to feel a lot more special, where right now, season just ended, didn't end the way that you wanted it to. But as we get further away from that, and especially if Georgia's able to find some continued success against Alabama, that's going to make things a lot better.
Yeah, if they exercise some losses there over in Tuscaloosa, it would be a nice thing to do. All right, there. All right, so Kaylee not with us this week. I can tell you where Kaylee will be in April. She will be on the high seas aboard Utopia of the Seas on our DawgNation cruise, and you can be there too. So here's what I did. I saved this until the end of the show. If you're a true DawgNation at large watcher and you've made it this far, here's the thing. I'm not telling everybody about this. I'm going to tell you about this. Get on DawgNation.com/contest, and you can enter to be on the ship with us on Utopia of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise this year. It's coming up April 20th through 24th, and you could be on there with the entire DawgNation crew and some of the best fans in the world. Yeah, they get a little bit rowdy sometimes. You can do it for free. Just go to DawgNation.com/contest right now. Tell us your favorite memory from the Kirby Smart era. That's all you've got to do. Don't get left on the dock while we're all partying in the Caribbean. You've got to enter by February 13th. Connor, final thing, what'd you learn today?
I learned to keep an eye on Chase Linton this year. Some good journalism there from Kaylee, getting that answer from Brett, a guy that I'm very interested in seeing who takes a step forward in that outside linebacker room.
Yeah, I'm very excited to go through the comments and hear the people. I think, the argument you made off the top is that Georgia, was a transfer portal winner, even though they're not listed on these lists. I think a lot of Georgia fans, it just seems the negativity rolled in after the season. It may still be rolling in, so there may be some folks ready to argue with you about that. It'll be interesting to see if we can all respond to that next week, right back here on DawgNation at Large. Kaylee Mansell will be back in the captain's chair. Coming up, we'll see you right back here next week, Thursday at 7 o'clock.